But the story I'm going to tell you today actually is not about working at Heifer. It's about way before I got into agriculture, and also not even in this country. And I usually talk a lot about local and growing locally and living locally and what that means. But I guess for me, some of the seeds that were planted for me happened abroad. So this story takes place in Honduras, and I was a second-year student in college, studying English and philosophy. So people ask me what I studied in school and what I do now, and they kind of give me a puzzled look, like how do they connect? And then I just tell them the first principle of ecology is that everything's connected. So, yeah, so I went to school for those degrees, but when I was studying, they had an option to go on an alternative spring break trip to Honduras, which sounded really great. It would be a fun thing to do, a good way to spend an alternative break. This is pretty common these days for college students. So I went on one. And when I got to Honduras, I was just blown away. The word Honduras translates literally to mean depths, and I feel like that's very true of that place. This is my first time out of the country, period, but it was also my first time in the third world, which I think is probably more apt to call the two-thirds world, because most of the world is living in similar conditions. And what I saw was mountains, but I also saw poverty underneath those mountains. So it was just a harsh transition to see the beauty of this landscape, but also the poverty that was surrounding it. But even amongst that poverty, those children that were carrying buckets of water on their head, like 5, 6 years old for their families, and the people that had to burn their trash in their backyards because there's nothing else to do with it, and the malnutrition and what have you. There was also a really great joy, and there was beauty, and there was family. And I don't mean to simplify the complexities of people's lives and certainly of poverty, but this is what it was rang true to me, seeing this for the first time as a sophomore in college. So I saw soccer games, and I also heard music, and I saw people coming together trying to improve their communities, and that's what we were there to try to help with. But I think we certainly left more helped than potentially the help that we gave. So what we were doing was planting with them. They had an orchard. This was called Project Eden, and they were trying to raise food for a clinic that was going to feed new mothers and also mothers in the community that had children, and just spread food around the community. So this was a relatively new project, and there were 300 men that were running it, and their names were Manuel, Rigoberto, and Tomas. And Rigoberto was kind of like the goof of the whole thing. He was always doing practical jokes, and he was goofing around with us, and just had this smile that would light up the room. And Manuel was an older man, but less old than he appeared to be, which is pretty common for the men in Honduras to look older than they really are because of the malnutrition. And he was just a kind, gentle soul, really, really made you feel quite at home. And then there was Tomas, who was a little bit more reserved, a little bit quieter. He was a younger guy, probably in his 30s, and had a couple kids to take care of and to raise. But really just the word integrity comes to mind when I think about him. We had gone out on our work trips during the week, and I had worked with Rigoberto, and we had a great time, and I worked with Manuel, and I just felt in constant awe of him as a person. And finally my time came to work with Tomas, and we were going out to one of the fields. And this field, just to set the scene for you, was one that they had just gotten, so it was pretty new, and the soil was pretty worn. It was kind of in a valley with some surrounding mountains, but there was a river going alongside one of the edges. And so to get water into the field, they had rigged up this system of PVC pipes hooked up to a generator to pump the water up into the field. And then they had this elaborate trench system that they would use hose to open and close different areas to let the water pass through. So it was really creatively done, and worked out very well for them. But it took a lot of work. And so we were there to help move pipes and move everything around. And it just so happened that on this day, too, there were some wild pigs that had gotten into the field and had eaten down all of the seedlings they had just planted. So most of us don't run into wild pigs in Worcester in the city, or even for me in Central Mass, but that's one of their problems to agriculture, is kind of the animals getting in and eating down all the crops. So they could have been, pretty upset about that, but they just smiled and said, that's kind of how it is, and moved on with the day. So that was pretty striking to me. But as we were working, we were planting seeds and working across from each other, and finally we had our siesta break, which I was very thankful for, because it was about 100 degrees, and I hadn't done a lot of agriculture before, so I wasn't used to that type of work. We were hot, we were sweating, and I'm like covered in dirt and sweaty, and I look over to Tomas, and he's like perfectly clean, he looks great. Like how, it's just amazing. So the heart of this story, just in time, is I was trying to get to know Tomas a little bit more, and so I asked him in broken Spanish, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Just trying to get to know him a little bit more. And I said that very broken and probably did like the international symbol for anywhere, because I didn't know how to say that word anywhere. And he just looked at me like, and he said, I don't have the desire to go anywhere. My life, my family, my country, they're all here. And then he looked at me and said, "Que más?" which is, what more, what more. And just that phrase, "Que más," has stuck with me ever since, and it's to guide my life when I'm thinking about the direction I want to take and what I want to do. What more? So I'll leave that with you all and thinking about your own lives. So, thank you.